This program is being recorded so that everyone can have access to it after. It will be sent out to all of the attendees after this program is concluded. I would ask that you please make sure that you are muted. We do have quite a few people in attendance today, so just out of respect for each other and for Shelby, our presenter. If you have questions during the presentation, please make sure you put them in the chat box. We will be stopping periodically to answer any questions in the chat box. And if there are questions that we are not able to get answered during the program, we will send out written answers with the link to the video after this program is concluded. I'd like to introduce to you our presenter, Shelby Mitchell. She is the Anti-Trafficking Advocate for Family Services Sexual Assault Center here in Brown County. Shelby, I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thank you so much, Beth. Before we get started, I want to just do an introduction for myself. So as Beth said, I am the Anti-Trafficking Advocate for the Sexual Assault Center. In that position, I serve Brown, Door, Oconto, and Marinette counties. And then I have also helped other counties close by who do not have services for trafficked victims. So I've been very blessed to be able to help those other communities, and a big thank you to Family Services for allowing me to step outside my normal role to do that. So what we're going to do today is just a human trafficking 101. So this is really just the basics. If we went much more in depth, we would be here for days. And I know all of you don't have that amount of time to commit to that in your schedules. So we'll take it just little by little here and see how far we can get. And then I also just want to be cognizant that everyone on this call may have different levels of knowledge and experience related to human trafficking. So some of this might be way under the amount of knowledge that you have, and then others might be learning something new about trafficking. So let's just keep that in mind too. So let's get started here. So as I said, these are the counties on the screen here that you can see. Those are the counties that I serve. I am based out of Brown County. However, I do travel to each of those counties, just depending on what's going on in those counties and where I need to be at any given moment. So I might start off in Brown County, be in the morning, and then be in Marinette in the afternoon, and possibly finish my day in Door. So really never know where I am. All right, so the first thing that we're going to touch on here is just the word human trafficking. It's a very broad definition of different kinds of trafficking that happens. So the broader definition, we have labor trafficking and sex trafficking that are kind of clumped together in this, these two words of human trafficking. What I'm going to focus on today is sex trafficking. So just to narrow that down a little bit more. And then there are also many other kinds of human trafficking around the world also. But labor trafficking and sex trafficking are the ones that we often hear the most about. This is just I'm gonna minimize you guys here so that I can see a little bit more. So this is just, again, different words that we often hear that all fall under the category of sexual assault. And what all of these different words have in common is that there was not consent that was given by the victim for this crime to be committed. So we might have something that starts off as a sexual assault, or it might be exploitation, and then eventually that crime may lead to sex trafficking. And we have seen a number of those cases that have come into our office that have started out as a sexual assault, just based off the general knowledge that we have. And the more we are talking to the victim of that crime, we realize that there's a lot more that has happened to them. And then eventually we get to learning the amount of exploitation they went through, and that they were in fact trafficked. So it might start off as one thing, and then the more trust that you have with that client and they see that you're there for the right reasons, they will start to open up to you, and you will start to learn more about their history. But definitely do not expect someone to come to you for help and then immediately say, I'm a victim of trafficking. That is very rare for that to happen. All right, let's start off with just definitions here, just to make sure that we are all talking about the same things. So, excuse me, we have a couple of different definitions for trafficking. We have federal, and then we also have state. The federal definition says, so there's three main words in here that we always look to: force, fraud, and coercion. But the broader definition here is the recruitment, harboring, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act in which those acts were induced by those three main words: force, fraud, and coercion. And now, before I get on to the second part, I don't like just talking to you guys. I like this to be interactive wherever we can. So this will be a chance that you can use the chat. And I want to just see, or if any of you want to unmute yourself. And this is pop quiz time. So I want to see how many of you know, in Wisconsin, what is the age of consent to be able to legally have sexual intercourse? So again, if you want to do this in the chat, or if anyone wants to just unmute yourself, that would be great.
Hi, so I'm from Colorado, but ours is 18 too, so I would kind of assume the same.
Okay, so I think what I heard was 18, but a lot of people are putting in 17. So I see actually a lot of, oops, sorry guys. A lot of you are saying the same thing, right between 17, 18. There is one in here that says 16. So this is perfect to have further conversation about. So in Wisconsin, the legal age to have sexual intercourse is 18. Now, for those of you that put 16, you're not wrong either. That also is a very important age in Wisconsin. So age 16, you can consent to sexual contact. So 16, 18, two very important numbers to remember in Wisconsin when dealing with any kind of, I guess, sex talk just in general. So when we're looking for consent, 16 to be able to consent to sexual contact, 18 sexual intercourse. Now the second part of this too is whoever you are engaging in these acts with, so let's say it's two 16-year-olds, they can consent to sexual contact, nothing beyond that. If you have two 18-year-olds, they can both legally consent to sexual intercourse. It gets really messy when we're talking about, let's say, a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. Well, the 17-year-old can consent to sexual contact. The 15-year-old cannot consent to anything at that point. So it's just a really quick, a lot more to talk about with that, just like everything, but that was just a really quick for Wisconsin law there. And for the federal, they also talk about It's this right here, which that force, fraud, or coercion do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion if the person is under the age of 18, because they cannot legally consent to sexual intercourse anyway. However, if they are 18 years or older, one of those three elements does have to be proven. Now in Wisconsin, we have pretty much the same as the federal definition. However, we have taken it a couple of steps further in the definition. So what Wisconsin says is recruitment, enticing, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining of a person without the consent of that person, or attempting to do any of those same things. Now, what I really love about the Wisconsin statute is that they are one of very few states that has transportation in the definition for trafficking. So a good example of why this is important is, let's say we have someone who is transporting someone. So Beth, I'm just gonna pick on you. Say I pick up Beth and I know that she's getting in the car and I'm transporting her for the purpose of her to be exploited in some way. Because I have that knowledge, Wisconsin statute says I am guilty of committing the crime of human trafficking. So once I have that knowledge, Beth gets in my car and I do nothing to stop that exploitation from happening to Beth, I am now guilty of human trafficking.
Shelby, there's a question. What does the law define as contact?
I love and hate this question. So contact is basically touching of intimate body parts without anything being inserted. That's just the very quick definition of that. So it can be touching of the penis, of the buttocks, of the breast, of the vagina, as long as nothing is being inserted in any of those body parts. And that is both over and under the clothes is how Wisconsin defines that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question. Again, there's so much of this that I'm just going to quickly glaze over and talk about, but even just the talk here about age of consent, this could be a couple-hour presentation in itself because there are so many different nuances to this law. So again, hopefully you guys stay with me and then add any comments that you have here as we go along too. But here is, I want to share a story with you, an example of the transportation statute that Wisconsin had that actually came into a case that I had. So not too long ago, there was a case in one of the counties that I work in that someone was charged with human trafficking. We ended up going through the whole court process. The offender did end up taking a plea, so thankfully we did not have to go to a jury trial. And then at sentencing hearing, the defendant had a chance to speak on his own behalf. And what he said to the judge was, "Your Honor, this really was blown more out of proportion than the role that I really had. All I did was give her a ride." So the legal nerd in me got very excited when I heard this because I knew that what he had just admitted to was the transportation part of this. So for any appellate reasons, he did just make an admission to, and we know that there was a lot more that he did. We have a ton of evidence to prove that. However, he did admit to the judge that he did provide transportation. So he did admit to the crime of human trafficking, that he did have that knowledge of what was going to happen to the girls that were in his vehicle. Okay, so here are a couple of warning signs for human trafficking, for sex trafficking especially, that we have seen in a lot of different people that I have worked with. But this is from Polaris Project. These are national and international warning signs. So this is not just Wisconsin based. This is all over the world, essentially, that we're seeing these types of behaviors. So you're going to see them on your screen, but I also want you just to use common sense when you see some of these. So, you know, after this presentation, if you are in town somewhere and you see someone who is dating someone older, don't immediately jump to they're being sex trafficked, okay? We need some other warning signs in there as well. So some of the most common ones that I have seen is may start off with dating someone older, but then that in combination with we start seeing major behavior changes, hanging out with people that they never did before, so whole new friend groups, limiting the friends that they had in their life before, or if they keep those friends, keeping them kind of at an arm's length and not being truthful with them about all the different aspects of their new life and their friends and what they're doing with this new group of people. And then for males, one of the more popular things I see with them is, so females, we usually see clothing, jewelry that traffickers are giving them to pull them into the world of trafficking. With males, we often see it with electronic devices. So it can be new game systems, phones, any of that latest tech gear. That is usually how traffickers get to males to kind of pull them into trafficking. So it's the same type of behavior, they just use different items to pull them into trafficking. And then another common one is signs of substance use or abuse. So this could be that they already have addictions and then the trafficker will exploit those addictions to the highest level possible. Or we see that it's kind of an introduction into different substances. So that party lifestyle, I had one client who she talked about the only experience that she had with any kind of substances was alcohol, and not even really hard alcohol, more like beer and wine. Well, she had met up with some people who were starting to introduce her to harder alcohol, and then that went into marijuana, and then it continued to escalate from there. And then she very quickly became addicted to those substances and was kind of at the beck and call of that trafficker. And we're going to get more into explanations behind that too. All right, I'll take a quick pause here and see if there's any questions that anyone has.
There aren't any questions right at this moment, but someone is just hoping that we will also touch on the trafficking of boys and men as well as women and girls.
Definitely. And all of the things that I'm talking about today, this is equal across the board for males and females. I have seen a number of both. So this is not just going to be focused on females being trafficked. So hopefully you just keep in mind males throughout this whole conversation as well. All right, so just a couple of statistics. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I'd like to touch on a couple of statistics just so everyone understands the scope of what we're dealing with. So this again from Polaris Project and another website called DoSomething.org, and they talk about every 10 minutes a woman or a child is trafficked in the United States. When I first started in this position and doing presentations, one of the first things that I would ask people is, what do you know about human trafficking? And I would just leave it very broad to see what kind of answers I was getting from that. And the number one response I was getting back is, this isn't an issue that happens in the United States, it's an overseas problem. And I was like, wow, okay. So we have a lot of work to do. And then the more that this topic of human trafficking was talked about, not just locally, but nationally and worldwide, that the number of people giving that response continued to decline. So I'm happy now to report that I have not heard that in a number of years now. And I'm so happy about that, because people are starting to realize that this isn't just an overseas issue, not just a United States issue, but this is a Brown County and a Forest County and Dane County issue. So it does affect our communities, the ones that we live and work in. If we do take this on a global issue, there are over 40 million people that are victims of human trafficking globally. Now, this statistic, I want to point out that it is both labor and sex trafficking that are combined in this number. And for what I have seen, and I was just talking with Beth about this a little bit ago, is I have not had a labor trafficking only case. The labor trafficking cases that I have seen have been in combination with sex trafficking. So it's not a this or a that. It's usually a combination of any way that a trafficker can exploit someone. They're going to do that to the highest extent possible. So if that is labor and sex, that means that that trafficker is going to be able to make much more income off of that person. And we're talking about people through a trafficker's eyes. They're seeing these victims of trafficking not as people, but as dollar signs. How can I make the most money off of this person? They are a commodity, and like I was saying before, just dollar signs. Ways to put money in that trafficker's pocket. In 2017, there was a survey that came out that estimated that 1 out of 7 endangered runaways reported to NETMEC were likely victims of sex trafficking. Of those 1 in 7, and I believe that that number is probably very low, because just in our area, we see that that is much, much higher. But of those 1 out of 7, 88% were already in the care of social services or foster care when they ran. So this is another moment that I want to have you guys participate. So if you want to, I think on here there's a hand raising option, or you can also just put it in the chat or just unmute. And I want to hear from you what you think might be a couple of reasons why that number is so high, that 88%. Again, there's no wrong answer here. So anything that you that comes to mind, please just enter that into the chat, or go ahead and unmute yourself.
My name is Maria Haskins. I am a community organizer with Minikanakim Inc., which means Community Rebuilders in the Menominee language. Prior to being a lead organizer and grant writer for a nonprofit, I worked directly with Child Protection Services and Juvenile Justice in the same community. And I believe that number is extremely high Because one, when we're placing the kids into these homes, even though they're safe and they may not have reason to feel, you know, unsafe or what have you, is I notice that a lot of kids, once they feel safe, it's a very different feeling for them. And so they're used to living in crisis, chaos, things of that nature. So they're taking off and they're going to what their norm is, right? Because being safe and stable is not a norm for them. So once that occurs, you know, more times than not, they're meeting people who are outside of their normal circle, who are promising them things such as a different home to live in, clothing, a job. Maybe they've been real independent throughout their life and they need a means for some type of income. I have one girl in particular that this brings me back to, where she had been basically taking care of herself since she was 9 years old. And she came to us for help because her mom was in and out of jail. She needed somewhere to go. So I was able to maintain her in a placement for 6+ months. I was the only worker that was able to do that with her. But she eventually wanted to go back to her mom, and her mom lived in the Madison area. But her mom was residing in a homeless shelter and struggled with alcoholism and addiction. So she took off and she needed a way to make money. And so she would call and she would check in with me. She wouldn't tell me where she was, but she would call me in my office and tell me, you know, this is so-and-so, I'm doing okay, I'm safe, you know, these are the things that I've been doing. And she had told me about an individual who she was messaging with on Facebook. And they wanted to meet her at some type of diner in downtown Madison. And for some reason, this girl, her kind of sirens went off and she wanted to message this person before she entered this diner to see who it was. So what she did was she messaged this person and she looked to see who would look down at their phone when that message would send. So this gentleman looked down at his phone and he had another woman with him who was kind of dressed to the nines, which we see that very common in human trafficking, as we'll see other women kind of helping these men recruit these young women to kind of say, you know, this is what I look like, this is what you could be. And so she freaked out and she took off. And I was like, oh my God, you were almost just tangled up in human trafficking. It would have been looking for a needle in a haystack had you gone with them. And so I had to educate her on the phone, you know, about all of these different things that she's at risk for while she's on the run as a 16-year-old woman. And so, you know, they're very vulnerable. And then not to mention right now, we have this huge epidemic going on with drug addiction, opioids, marijuana, you know, benzos, all of that. And so I think that when people are able to feed those addictions to them, that's how they're able to really get their claws in. I'm not going to give you more until you do this. So that's my thought, that's my perspective, that's what I've seen. And also case overload. I mean, with the drugs and the alcohol and the craziness that's going on right now, workers are getting burnt out, can't keep them on staff, and it's just a really hard, challenging job. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you so much, Maria, for sharing that. And I think anytime we have an opportunity to hear stories like Maria just shared, it really puts this in perspective of the major issue that we have here. That Maria shared one story out of millions. I'm sure, you know, as we go through this presentation today, if you haven't already realized that you may have worked with someone who has been trafficked or is currently being trafficked, that might come to light by the end of this, because I think so many of us have these interactions every day and probably don't even realize it until we have the education to what we're looking for or what to look for. So thank you again, Maria. And then many of you in here, I'm just trying to look through this chat right here and do double duty here. And many of you are absolutely correct. So obviously they're in the care of social services or foster care for a reason. something was already going on in that family that alerted social services to the fact that these parents or parent could not properly care for that child or didn't have the amount of resources needed to care for that child. So there's probably already a history of trauma that that child has been through, maybe abuse of various different types of abuse, and then maybe even witnesses to crimes or addictions already. So if I'm a trafficker, I am looking for these kids exactly, because these are the kids that I'm not going to have a very hard time molding and getting them to do what I want, because in the eyes of a trafficker, these are already damaged kids, right? And I'm not saying that from my perspective, but from a trafficker. That there are already so many different ways that we can pull on the heartstrings of the kids that are in foster care or social services, that it makes it really easy for us to lure them with different items, or say that we're a family and I care about them. You know, they may have never had that in their life. So now that they are hearing that from someone, that emotional connection is very, very strong for them. All right, just a couple more stats here. The International Labor Organization estimates that human trafficking, so again, this is both labor and sex, is a $150 billion a year industry. And I think this is the best number that they can come up with or narrow it down to. So this might be very well an underestimate of the amount of money that traffickers are making, profiting off of the exploitation of human beings. And if we narrow down really what is human trafficking in general, it's really the exploitation of vulnerability. We had talked about warning signs before. Well, that's what traffickers really feed off of, is a vulnerability. And if there is not a vulnerability that they see, then they create it. And that can be in a variety of ways. I think of myself. I have a cell phone, and if I go out for a walk, I feel like, all right, I have my phone. I'm okay. I can call if I needed help. Well, how many numbers do I remember outside of 911, friends, family members, that I have memorized? Not many anymore, because they're all in my phone. So if you take away that phone, that is a vulnerability. I don't have the numbers that I might need to reach out to people that I feel comfortable with. And I might think, oh, this isn't a 911 issue, so I'm not going to alert them and have police come, because maybe I don't have a good relationship with police, and I maybe have a history myself of being a criminal. So I look at law enforcement as negative. So I don't want to get them involved if I don't have to. And then the other thing is, if I don't have a phone, where else can I go for a phone? There's no pay phones anymore. So different things like that are so simple, but you take away that one thing and it creates a huge vulnerability. All right, and also the average age of entry is 12 to 14 years old. Again, this is just an average number. I've seen this number as low as 8 and as high as, starting off on the low end. So as young as 8 years old being trafficked, all the way up into later teen years. But this is the average age. So I want to have you think about yourself at 12 years old or 13 years old, and the amount of resources that you know in the community and how you access those resources that you are aware of. Right, so again, if I'm a trafficker, I want to go for someone younger, because the younger they are, the less community resources they're aware of people that can help. Also, just another really interesting statistic that I had heard is we have more people enslaved now than any other time in human history. So I think of you know, all the different events that have happened in our world so far, and it could be that, you know, we didn't keep great statistics before and all of that, but just think of the number of people right now in the year 2020 that are being enslaved, forced to do something that they don't want to do because someone is making them do that. They have no say in it. It's just very unreal. All right. Victims of human trafficking also do not have any particular faiths. Truly, anyone can be a victim of human trafficking. I don't know if any of you have heard the story of Teresa Flores. She has a book called Slave Across the Street. She talks, and I won't ruin it for anyone who's not read it and is interested. However, she talks about being from an upper middle class family. Dad was high up in a business, and Dad was so successful that every couple of years they would relocate, and the father was helping businesses kind of get on their feet and grow and all of that. So Teresa talks about when they had recently made a move near Detroit. This was in the 1970s. And just the route that her life took that led to human trafficking. Now, this wasn't someone who was from a minority group, who didn't have much for income. And that's really what we hear about most often with trafficking. And that definitely happens. Teresa's story paints a different picture of it really can be anyone. They were a Caucasian family, upper middle class, like I said, and she was lured into trafficking. So really can happen to anyone. Again, that book, if anyone is interested, is called Slave Across the Street by Teresa Flores. Oh, Sai, you just put it in the chat. Thank you for whoever did that. Most victims go willingly with their trafficker. So obviously I have willingly here in quotes. I don't mean that they say, oh, that's a trafficker over there. That sounds like a good time. I'm gonna go with them and see what kind of adventures I can have. Absolutely not. A trafficker does not present themselves as being a trafficker. They are that concerned person that wants the best for this person that they're trying to lure into their traps. They act like a concerned older boyfriend or girlfriend. Even father figures we've seen that they talk about, you know, well, your life is really crappy and I want to be able to help you out. And they pretend to really care about that person, offer them things that maybe they've not had before. So they go with them. So yes, that part is willing, but they also don't know who they're going with. So once they learn that there are other expectations here other than this person just being a caring individual, they do want to leave. And it's very hard for them to exit out of that life once they are pulled in by that trafficker. And again, many people do not think that they're victims of trafficking because they believe that they're doing, so one story, I wanna just share this to have this make a little more sense. There was someone I had worked with who was dating someone who had talked about, you know, she had shared, like, he showered me with gifts and we were always going out to eat, and he made sure I had the best, most expensive items, just to show how much he cared and loved me. And then one day he had come to her and said, you know, I have been showering you with all of these gifts, and because I've been doing that, you no longer have money for rent. So this is what I need you to do. If you really care about me, the way that I've shown that I've cared about you, I need you to, for only one night, dance in this club. If you dance in this club for one night, we will have enough money that we'll be able to pay our rent, and we won't have to worry about being homeless. So she thought that she was going to dance just this one time in a club, and she was doing it for the right reasons, to show how much she cared about her boyfriend. Well, once she danced that one night, he had convinced her to do it night after night, and she ended up doing it for, I believe it was around 7 months, before she convinced him that she wanted to stop doing it. So in her case, she had also told me that she did not believe that she was a victim of human trafficking, because she was doing it on her own to help out her boyfriend, to show how much she cared for him. So not uncommon that I've seen that in many different victims, that they do not believe that they are a victim of human trafficking because of the language that the trafficker uses to convince them otherwise. Did someone have a comment?
No, I think someone just got unmuted for a moment.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then we also see with teens that they're merely just surviving by following the wishes of their trafficker or pimp. So just getting through. Another example, there was, and this is in the Slave Across the Street as well, that there was a teen who had nude photos of her taken, and she thought that she could earn these photos back by following the wishes of the trafficker. You know, if she had sex with X number of men, then she would earn a picture back. Well, those pictures never came, and she ended up being forced to have sex with person after person after person, and she did not receive any of those pictures that she was hoping for. So that is another level of exploitation there too, because that trafficker will often hold those pictures over their heads. And I've seen this with males too, who have had pictures of them taken, and then sometimes that was willing, that they were sharing these pictures willingly, and then that turned into ads being posted online for them using those pictures. So trafficking locally here, what we see is that most traffickers are male. However, we have also seen some traffickers who are female, but who are also using the same kind of manipulation tactics that we see with males. With trafficking, there are usually two different types. One who is like the guerrilla pimp. Those are ones who usually use force. And then ones who are Romeo, and they they really prey on the emotional side. So showing that they love and care for that person, that's more the Romeo. And kind of that story that I had shared on the last slide of getting the girl to dance in a club, that was the Romeo. Now, if we have a trafficker who is a Romeo or a guerrilla, at any point they can switch back and forth. So not all traffickers are one or the other. So it could start out that they're being a Romeo, and then when they're not getting their way, switch to guerrilla. And guerrilla is one who uses force. So it could be physical beatings, torture, burning. I've seen that where they will physically burn people who they are trafficking. And then in some cases too, I've seen, so if I'm a trafficker and I ask, let's say, girl A to have a certain quota for the night, so a certain amount of money that she needs to make for me that night. If she does not reach that quota, instead of me hurting her, I'm going to hurt another girl and I'm going to force her to watch it. So what that does is that creates a different kind of mentality for girl A, who is forced to watch that, and girl B, who was beat because of girl A, now she is not really wanting to be friends with girl A anymore because she got her hurt. So now they're all kind of fighting against each other. So girl A is going to work extra hard to make sure that no one gets hurt on her watch again. So it's a really great way for that trafficker to use that that manipulation, really that brainwashing to get the people who he is trafficking to really do what he wants them to do. I also see kids recruiting other kids. And what I mean by this is maybe someone who is already involved with a trafficker. So let's say they're maybe a teenager and they're involved with a trafficker, and that trafficker says, you know, we're having such a good time. I want your friends to be a part of this too. And what that teen starts to do then is recruit other friends into this, and oftentimes not even realizing that they're recruiting them into human trafficking. We have also had kids who are just straight recruiters, meaning that they're not having to provide any types of sex acts, but their only job is to recruit kids to that trafficker. So it could be the talking about these parties, or flying to destination like Las Vegas or Florida and showing their friends how much fun they're having, and oh, you can be a part of this too, not realizing what's happening on the other side of that these aren't just vacations or items that you're getting, that there is something at a cost for all of that.
Shelby, someone is asking, what type of numbers are we looking at for trafficking in Wisconsin?
I really hesitate to actually give a number because I think there are some agencies that report on numbers so differently that it's hard to pinpoint and say, we have 5,000 cases in Wisconsin. Well, we don't really know that because Appleton may report numbers very differently than Green Bay or, other counties. So it's such a hard thing to put a finger on and say, this is how many we have throughout the state. And there are many too that do not report to law enforcement or have no CPS contact that are being trafficked that we do not know about. But I would feel comfortable saying that it is way more than we even know. And I would say upwards of tens of thousands just in the state alone. I am going to give some resources here in just a minute that will allow you to look at each state a little more in depth than we have time for today, but I'm sorry that I just can't throw out a solid number for that. Okay. Beth, any other questions before we move on?
Not at the moment.
Okay. And then the last one is about recruiting. Where are they happening? The super easy answer to this is everywhere. I left some things on here that, you know, maybe aren't as popular anymore, but I wanted to just show that it happens really anywhere that people are. So it could be at an art museum. It could be at schools, parks, movie theaters, like I have on here. But outside of physical locations, then we have this whole other world that is the internet. And it just exponentially, we have recruitment happening online. So a good number of years ago now, many of you may recall that Backpage.com was taken down by the federal government. Well, unfortunately, we do still have a version of Backpage. What it did was switch from the US to overseas. So there is still a version of Backpage, maybe not being utilized nearly to the extent that it was previous. And for those of you that are not familiar with Backpage, it was essentially like an eBay. So you could go on, you could look for a house, a car, you know, and narrow that down into the state and region that you lived in. Well, they also had this section on their website that was basically that you could shop for a person. So it could be that I am a male looking for another male, or I am a female looking for a male. And I could literally just scroll through different ads and I could shop people. So there were ads that were posted on there. And, you know, I could get up at 8 a.m. in my pajamas with my coffee, search on Backpage, set up a date so that I had a date that I could have, you know, for already confirmed for my lunch break. So I have that set up, already done. Well, we may not have the same version of Backpage now, but we have a million other versions of it. And those are through different smartphone apps and various different websites. So other things like meetme.com and Kik, Snapchat, we're going to get into a lot of other sites here too. But this is something that we do know about traffickers in our area, and I want to just make mention of this, is that buyers of people in our area, when law enforcement does different stings, what they're finding is that the commonalities between the buyers are that they are mostly men who are married, have children, and have a college education. So that is what we've been able to narrow down locally about the buyers in Brown County. All right, this slide is just really going off of those different apps and websites that I was talking about. So this is really just to give you an idea of how and where some trafficking, recruitment happens. So we have a site here like Snapchat, to other ones like Omegle, or the one here, that the black one with the yellow mask, that's Grindr. So some of these apps are set up with specific people and purposes in mind. So Grindr, this is they actually promote themselves as a gay hookup app. I believe that's on their website of how they promote the usage of their site. And what I've seen with Grindr is in smaller communities where maybe there is not an LGBTQ population, I have had some a teen actually who went online looking for information about being gay. He didn't really know for sure if he was gay. He had a lot of questions that led him into different chat sites and forums, which eventually led him to Grindr. So unfortunately, you know, someone who was really just looking for information and trying to figure out his own sexuality ended up leading to exploitation for him. And he was trying to do it in a way that would get his questions answered and figure out what his sexuality really was, and that was exploited through an app like Grindr.
Shelby, what are the questions? What is the calculator looking at?
All right, so that one, this is actually, when I have this, this screen up, that is one of the most popular questions that I get. So I was waiting for it. This calculator app, so many of you who have iPhones may recognize this looking like a calculator. However, there is a duplicate version of this that is actually set up as a photo vault app. So what it, so on the outside, it looks like it's a calculator, but once I open it and put in a password, it actually opens up a bunch of pictures, usually very inappropriate pictures, a lot of nudity that maybe I don't want my parents to see. So I'm seeing this mostly with teens or young adults who don't want to have on their regular camera roll some of these pictures that they're taking or posting, or maybe even sexting to boyfriend, girlfriend. So they use different apps like this, photo vault apps, that they can store these photos in a secure location without parents kind of stumbling upon them and finding it on their camera roll. I see another question here. The guy at the bottom left. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but so this guy kind of has a smile on his face, blonde hair. That is actually Fortnite. What's very interesting about Fortnite is this is something that came out on, I believe it was PlayStation. I always get my my gaming consoles wrong, but I believe it was PlayStation. And so it started off on there. And what's interesting about Fortnite is that, like many other games, you can chat and you form teams, so you're kind of working together for a common goal. Well, what's very different about Fortnite is that they took this game that is usually in a game console and they've created it, same thing in an app. So let's say you're a parent, your teen is, or your child is at home playing on Fortnite, and you say, all right, time to go, enough game time, we're getting in the car and we're going somewhere. Well, if they have a smartphone, you need to double check if they have this game on their phone, because what can happen is they can pause that game console and they can pick up right where they left off on their smartphone. So they can be having these same conversations, talking with the same people as they were on the game console right on their smartphone. Now, why Fortnite is so different too is that we have seen a lot of recruitment happening on Fortnite from males to other young males. So recruitment happening in that way, specifically through that game. So I definitely wanted to make mention of Fortnite because it's so different than games that we've seen before. And there are definitely recruitment happening on other, with other games, but we've not seen it to the extent that we are with Fortnite. Also, what is very interesting with traffickers or recruiters also is that they will switch between a lot of different apps. So we might start off let's say talking on Facebook, and then I stop that conversation and I say, let's switch over to Instagram. So now Instagram, they have a chat option on there where you can do direct messaging. And then I might say, oh, I downloaded this app I want to check out. I don't really know it that well. Let's jump over to Kik. So now we're on Kik and we're talking on there. So this is very intentional by traffickers because you don't have a steady stream of conversation if you're law enforcement downloading these different apps. You have to get subpoenas from 3 different apps now and try and piece together these conversations to see how this recruitment has evolved through those different conversations. So that's just an example, and they bounce around all these different apps. And there are different options in each of the different apps as well. So some, they prefer different apps because they're encrypted. So once that conversation is ended and the app is closed out, that conversation is done. So again, it's very intentional on the side of traffickers for which ones they're using.
Shelby, do you have any recommendations for apps to monitor a child's phone?
I'm so happy you asked, Beth. That is actually what I want to talk about with Protect Young Eyes at the bottom right here. This is a really great website for parents or really anyone who wants to know what different apps and websites do. They also give an age rating on each of the different apps. And on that website, they provide different types of monitoring. So different programs that you can, use to monitor different devices. So it doesn't have to, be really encumbering on a device, but just something that you see that that they're maybe up at 1 o'clock in the morning talking on a different app. Well, that's very alarming. A parent needs to know that, especially for a young child who might not be making some really great decisions at that time of the morning. So, you can see what some of their behaviors are, and then also use that same, monitoring system to shut down devices at certain times. So you can set, let's say, 2 hours of screen time a day between 5 and 7. So you can control and monitor right from your own device on how that device is utilized.
No, are you talking about a specific app, or you said there was a list of apps on Protect Young Eyes?
Yes, there's a list of different monitoring devices that parents can use, and it's right on Protect Young Eyes. They have, I believe it's a tab right on there that you can go to and see different ones that they recommend. And those are for phone devices, also laptops and desktops. So you can use it in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to just be a phone or a computer.
Okay, thank you.
I know that certain phones too, like an iPhone, they have ways that you can monitor a device right within the device itself. So I actually have a whole separate presentation talking about social media and all of that. And so that's kind of a whole side thing there too, but getting to know your phone and different ways that you can monitor a device right through the phone is very helpful too. But if you have specific questions, I'll stick around for a little bit here after the presentation. And then I think we're going to have a moment too where I try and answer as many questions as we can. The other important thing to mention with different apps is that they are changing, I want to say daily, but it's so much more frequent than even on a day-to-day basis, that there are new apps that are coming out minute by minute, and it is so hard to keep up with what each app does and how to know what that app does to protect youth and sometimes even adults from it, because it's hard to keep a lookout for it when you don't know what the app does itself. So many things that we're responsible for now and keeping up on, that it's just so incredibly challenging to do all of that. Okay, a couple of different risk factors. By no means is this a complete list. This really is just something to get us started. So many different risk factors here that make people vulnerable or create a vulnerability in someone. Again, we could spend a long time talking about minorities. What I have seen and what is happening nationally is that Native American youth and women are at a much higher rate of victimization. Not only human trafficking, but we see that same thing with domestic violence and sexual assault, much higher risk of victimization. With human trafficking specifically, however, there was one trafficker who had mentioned that he really likes being able to groom Native Americans into trafficking, because the more people who are Native, just the type of skin color that they have, he can sell them to look like many different types of cultures. So again, we might have a buyer who is saying, I want a Hispanic 16-year-old. Well, he might not have a Hispanic 16-year-old, but he could say, you know, this Native American could pass for being Hispanic to this buyer. So that is money, again, that he's putting in his pocket by exploiting that Native American youth. Also, a history of drug and alcohol abuse and use will put people at a higher risk for being trafficked. We've had some traffickers who will hang out at people who are drug trafficking or selling drugs, hang out on that block and wait for people to come and buy, or we'll just see them kind of pacing back and forth, knowing that they don't have money to purchase those drugs. So then that trafficker steps in and will offer to buy drugs and have an endless supply of drugs if they will do what he's asking. And unfortunately, just the nature of addiction, they have had many people that have fallen into that and are kind of at the mercy of that trafficker because they have needed a fix for their addiction.
Shelby, Michelle has asked, how can we tell what stories are in the media are real versus, you know, because there's been a lot, the Wayfair story, troll dolls, and then Victoria's Secret and pink bras trackers.
Yeah, that one is really challenging. Really just do your research. You know, if you see something on social media, say it's someone posted an article on Facebook, don't just repost it and say, you know, this is gospel. Do your research, find out if that is a new trend that's going on before you repost or attack someone on social media saying it's not true. And this is something that I'm constantly having to catch up with myself. And I get into these rabbit holes of conspiracy theories and all that because I have to try and figure out for my job, like an example here, like Wayfair. Is Wayfair human traffickers, and they have this front for a business, but really behind the scenes, they're trafficking people. Well, that's very important for me to know, right? So you get into these rabbit holes of finding out, like, what is the truth here, and kind of cutting through all of that. And sometimes there's not an easy answer. But I would say, as much as you can, do your research, try and educate yourself and others of, just because it's on social media does not mean that it's true, and having people repost this and causing hysteria in our area for something that might not be truthful. Another one that I see very often too is people that were followed in stores and then out into parking lots, and they will post their stories and say, you know, I was almost trafficked, or my daughter, or, you know, another family member or friend. Typically, we are not seeing traffickers that, in the United States anyway, that will kidnap someone and force them into trafficking that way. That is just not something that is done in our area. It is more that grooming style that happens versus following someone in the store, and just this vision that I see is, you know, following them in a store, kind of getting an idea of who they are, who they have with them, and then finding out, oh, they're alone, and then following them out into a parking lot and forcing them into what we would call like the kidnapper van, right? That is not happening in our area. It is much more subtle over the internet, that grooming that I had talked about. And I saw someone just posted that Dirty Dozen list. Yes, absolutely. I was going to talk about that. The Dirty Dozen list, they come out with businesses who are not doing their part to stop human trafficking, or are funneling money into organizations that support trafficking. So that is a very good website to look at, the Dirty Dozen list. And it does change. I think they come out with a list not only every year, but every, I want to say 6 months, or maybe even sooner than that, for businesses that contribute to exploitation of any kind. So very good resource there. Another one, just getting back to risk factors here, is runaway and homeless youth. Again, this is a huge vulnerability. So they might not have a good situation at home, or they think it's not a good situation and they run. So we hear about homeless youth, runaway, and then also this term that it just makes me kind of shiver each time is the throwaway youth. Do not like that term, but you know, that really kind of came about for parents who said you're no longer welcome here, and they throw out their kid to kind of figure it out on their own. So that often ends up where that youth is couch surfing, or going from friend to friend, looking for somewhere to stay the night. So of course that creates a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of different ways that they could be harmed, not only for being trafficked, but so many other things. So any kind of homeless, runaway youth program, thank you so much for the work that you do, protecting and looking out for our youth, because there's too much of a correlation between runaway and homeless youth and sex trafficking, and anything that we can do to intervene before it gets to the point of a youth being trafficked, that is definitely a win for us. Okay, so organization like Polaris Project, they have, just gonna do a time check here. So they have something that's called the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So National Human Trafficking Hotline and Polaris Project are actually one and the same. So let's say that someone contacts the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have some behavior that they see as being suspicious. Well, all the information that that hotline can take down from you, they will do that. So it could be a car with a license plate. It could be something so much less than that, of a youth that was walking alone on the intersection of this street and that street, and you maybe don't have much else beyond that, but maybe you just have a gut feeling that something is not right. You can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, report all the information that you have. They will give you a report number. So you don't have to be anyone special, you know, working in a youth serving organization or a human trafficking organization. You can just be a concerned citizen, and you can contact them. You will get a report number at the end of that. And then once you hang up, the hotline will call local law enforcement, and they will search that area and try and follow up on whatever you just reported. So where this hotline really comes in handy is, let's say I'm traveling and I'm in South Dakota, and outside of 911, I don't know very quickly what their police hotline number is, but I know the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. So I can call and I can report it there. The information still gets to the jurisdiction that where the information that I saw happened, and then that jurisdiction, law enforcement jurisdiction, will go out and do an investigation for that. And then me as the caller, if in a couple of days I'm curious of whatever happened to that, I can call back the human trafficking hotline number, and I can give them my report number and just say, I want to just know what happened with this case. And you can get an update as long as they have one. So it's a really good way to be able to report something that is suspicious, but also maybe still have a conclusion or an ending to that, where so many times we'll report and we don't know, you know, that Paul Harvey moment, the rest of the story. Well, by having that report number, oftentimes you can find out what happened afterward. So on this map here, what you're seeing is really different calls being plotted on a map. So if we have, not sure if you guys can see my cursor or not, but on, let's say in Northeast Wisconsin here, we have a lot of people who are calling and reporting. Well, all of that gets reported on the map. And the more people in that area who call and report, the darker that color gets. So I say, just like a stove, the redder it is, the hotter it is. And that is what we're seeing in kind of this area here. And really what we have there is Highway 43, right? So this is from Chicago up into Milwaukee area, Fox Valley, and then up into the Green Bay area. So really Highway 43, I'm not surprised at all to see that this area is, we're dark orange, kind of right now on the brink of red here in this area. And that is really across the whole map here that you're seeing. It's also no surprise that on border areas, border states, we do see a higher concentration of reports happening there. And then in areas where you're not seeing much, like the state here, there's barely anything at all. Well, that can be a number of things happening there. Maybe a lot of people do not know that the National Human Trafficking Hotline exists, or don't know what warning signs are. So there might not be a lot of outreach and education that's happening in this state for human trafficking, that people know that there's even a resource to call and report such a thing. And then we see areas like states here Alaska, and then Hawaii. So national human trafficking, it's all 40 states that that information is plotted on a map. And again, if you want to go back to Polaris Project, you can look at past years. I believe it started in 2007 that they started documenting this information and plotting this information on a map. You can start at 2007 and work your way up through each year and see how the states have increased during those years. So now bringing it from a national level to a local area here, this is something I call the Trafficking Triangle, and it's something that I was just talking about with the area starting Highway 43, Chicago, up into Wisconsin, all the way up into the Green Bay area. And then we have a highway that cuts right across our state into Minneapolis. And then we see that going right back down. Well, this triangle actually had started with drug trafficking. So people coming from Minnesota and Chicago and trafficking drugs around this triangle. Well, very much not a coincidence at all that drug traffickers were starting to realize that they have a certain amount of drugs and they sell that to their buyers, and then they're out and they have to go back to a larger city and get more supply to be able to sell to their buyers again. Well, it's very risky for someone who is trafficking drugs like that to go back to these larger operations and transport these drugs to get it back to their customers. So incredibly risky for them. So they, good business model here. I say that with with a little edge, that they have figured out that, well, if we can sell people, that's an endless supply that we have. So unlike these drugs that once their supply is gone, it's gone, and they have to go back and risk, law enforcement finding them. Well, it's less risky if they start selling people, and well, they're not going to get out of the drug game completely. So now they have people who they are trafficking for sex, also now delivering drugs for them. So now there's an increased bubble there for them of protection. So they're making money hand over fist, but their risk level has gone down exponentially.
So Shelby, we have about 5 minutes left, just
okay.
So you're aware.
All right, thank you so much. So that's the red area here. I've added this yellow area here to see, just to show that over the last couple of years, we have seen that this triangle has started to expand. So it's expanding now into Door County and Oconto and Marinette. And I wish I could highlight it right now and show you that now we're even seeing that it's going over the border into the Upper Peninsula. And we have a lot of people who are being trafficked from the Upper Peninsula into Wisconsin. And a number of people who I have worked with who started out dancing in a club in the Upper Peninsula and then got on a circuit. And that circuit brought them all over Wisconsin, but a good number of them focused right in this area in Northeast Wisconsin. So I have seen that strip clubs have been an entry point for a lot of different girls, especially that I have worked with. But again, it's not only females who are being trafficked that way. We see different pop-up things like a Chippendales style. So males are being trafficked that way also. Some of the males that I have worked with, it has been connected back to drugs, though, that they were drug addicted and very much in need of a fix, and someone had offered to supply drugs if they just started doing sexual things for them. So it could start off with oral sex. So then they got that edge off with getting that fixed, and then that oral sex no longer was good enough, and then they started to escalate in the sexual favors that they were asking for. So what human trafficking really comes down to is, outside of force, fraud, and coercion, we really need three things. We need an act, a means, and a purpose. So I could be talking all day long about, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to recruit people, and I'm going to make a ton of money, and I'm going to do it by exploiting people online. Well, I can say that, but I also have to act on it. So all three of these things have to line up to have acts, means, and purpose for me to be committing human trafficking. And I know we're really short on time, so I'll keep going here. So this is a quote that I really like to end with, just it's kind of like an action step, right? A call to action. You may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know. Once you know what you're looking for with human trafficking, you absolutely will see it everywhere. An example of this is I went to a human trafficking conference in New York City. And one of the things that one of the presenters said is, once you walk out these doors, you are going to see human trafficking everywhere. And I was like, oh no, this is gonna be so overwhelming. And first of all, I was in New York, one of the biggest cities in the world, right? And I had just learned everything you could possibly cram into a brain about human trafficking. And I walked out the doors of this building that I was at this training at, and within a first block, I said, absolutely, that's human trafficking. And you can see it, and it's not like that streetwalker type that you see on Pretty Woman. That's not what I was referring to. Just people who are going about, quote unquote, their normal life, but human trafficking was happening right under all of our noses. It's so subtle sometimes that it is really hard to pick up, but once you know what you're looking for, you absolutely will see it. So I thought I had it on this slide, Beth. I realize now that I don't, but I will send you a couple of resources, National Human Trafficking Hotline number, and a couple of other just quick resources so that people have it. Again, Polaris Project, really great resource. Another fantastic website is Shared Hope International. Both of these websites keep up to date on not only myths and facts, but statistics and new resources for us to use. Again, I can't emphasize enough, this was just a very, very quick overview of human trafficking. Did not get into merely the whole scope of trafficking here, but I hope that this was helpful for each of you, and if you have any questions, I will stick around for a little bit and answer as many as I can.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you to everyone. We did have quite a few more people register than who came, so everyone who registered will receive an email with the link to the video, and then if Shelby's willing, maybe share your PowerPoint as well as a PDF.
I usually do not,
okay.
Just because there's so much more conversation that goes just beyond the slides on the screen. So usually I do not do that. So no offense to anyone. I just really love to have the deeper conversations other than just, the information on the screen.
Sure thing. I'm gonna yeah, if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to unmute yourself and we can start asking them since it's going to be a little less formal now. And we're getting a lot of requests for your social media presentation, so we might have to schedule that one. One question that I did see that we didn't get to answer was, so what is the best thing to do if you spot possible trafficking? Is it calling the human trafficking hotline?
You can definitely call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Otherwise, with our local law enforcement here, I've asked them, you know, would you be upset if anyone called and reported something concerning, but it turns out not to be trafficking? And every one of them said, absolutely not. We want to, investigate and make sure that it's not, versus just assuming that everything is fine. So if you have that gut feeling, something is just not right, please, please, please just report as much information as you can. And then I also cannot emphasize enough, do not intervene. As much as we want to kind of be the hero in these situations, it is not safe for us to do that. Let's rely on law enforcement to do their job in the ways that they know how to do it. And we can just report what we're seeing without personally involving ourselves.
Okay. So are you active in Marinette County?
I am, yes.
Okay. So Alexis, you can reach out to Shelby. Her information will be in the email that we send out. And then what works best to raise awareness in communities about sex and human trafficking?
I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to talk about this being an issue in our communities. Brown County or Marinette or whatever smaller community, people just assume that this isn't something that happens here until we start talking about it and sharing with them stories that do in fact happen in each of these communities. As much as I want to say there's a safe community out there, that's not true. None of us are exempt from this happening in the communities that we live in. So we need to talk about it. And anywhere that you have an opportunity to just raise the issue of human trafficking, I think we have to start small. Sometimes smaller communities aren't always ready for us to have the big conversations right away. So starting small, and we can start talking about domestic violence. That's an example. It took us 30 plus years to be able to talk about domestic violence in regular conversations. Well, it's taking us just as long to talk about sexual assault. It is going to take us just as long to talk about human trafficking. So, we have to also just recognize that not all communities are ready for deep conversations right away, but we can start talking about things that are not okay. It's not okay for someone to be touched without their consent, to be exploited in any way, to be hit. So different things like that can lead us into deeper conversations, but we don't just dive into the deep end right away. We have to kind of test the waters sometimes and just find out if they're ready for those conversations. And sometimes we need to force communities be ready for those conversations. So I'm not saying don't have those talks, but sometimes there is, a slow process that needs to evolve first before we dive in.
And then the other question is, so you mentioned it's everywhere if you know what to look for. Are there any websites or anything like that that we could provide for more information on exactly what to look for?
Yeah, so the websites that I had talked about already, so Shared Hope International, and that's sharedhope.org, and then Polaris Project, so same thing, polarisproject.org. Those are both websites. They have great handouts. I can type it here in the chat so you guys all have it. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is going to be all over that. Each of those websites, their phone numbers. Also, National Human Trafficking Hotline also has a text line. So for some reason, if you're seeing something but maybe it's not safe to get on the phone and say, this is what I'm seeing right now. You can also text that number. And for anyone who maybe is a victim of trafficking themselves, they can also text that for information as well. So a lot of different ways to get information and resources. For survivors themselves, we also just have to be very conscious that ways that we get information might not be safe for them. So we have to not force any information on them, but ask them what is safe for them. So, you know, would it be safe for you to have this this text number in your phone, or a handout of some kind? They know their situation better than anyone, and we don't want to create something that's going to put them in increased danger. So we just need to be conscious of that too. Oh, you just typed it in. Thank you.
Yeah, I just typed it in. And we will include links to the websites and kind of everything that Shelby talked about that wasn't up on the screen. So we'll include information about the book you had mentioned, Slave Across the Street, and the Dirty Dozen list, and Protect Young Eyes websites. We'll include all of that in the email that we'll send out with the link to the video. So thank you everyone so much. And thank you, Shelby. This was fantastic. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I would be remiss if I did not point out that if anyone is going to read Slave Across the Street, huge trigger warning, proceed with caution, because she does get into very explicit moments of her trafficking. So I just want to let everyone know that. And also, Teresa Flores, if maybe you're not a reader, but you like watching just shorter clips, she also does a TED Talk. So she is on there as well.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone so much. And since we have your email addresses, since you registered, if and when we can do the social media trafficking program, we will send an email out to everyone. All right, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for sticking around a little bit longer for us. Bye.
Thank you.